To this day, the US military runs on code run on machines that are half a century old. These Unibus machines, despite the apparent loss of quality, continue to work. And the US continues to do this because of the Murphy's Law of coding. The Murphy's Law of coding is, quite simply, if it gets changed, it will break. If you change the system, you will end up further back than where you started just because of the sheer amount of problems you will inevitably introduce. In 2011, Minecraft's foil, Terraria, was released. Terraria was a much more adventure and survival-based game, where each biome has unique enemies, and each enemy drops unique materials, and these unique materials have to be collected to progress the game. You were able to make better equipment, better blocks, better villagers by adventuring and finding new things. But then, one of Terraria's two co-creators, Ty Yuri, also known as Finn Bryce, leaves the Terraria team and goes to make a new, bigger, better sandbox game. This is the long, painful death of Starbound. The natural problem with sandbox games is that while they theoretically have no end, they can never truly offer an infinite experience. At some point, you finish the biggest build you could possibly imagine, and there's nothing left for you to make. At some point, you kill the final boss, and there's nothing else to find. But there is a silver bullet to this problem in procedural generation. Rather than handcrafting content, Starbound generates each planet and each star in the entire galaxy procedurally. If the procedural generation could be diverse enough, and the dungeons and events on each planet engaging enough, this could truly be an infinite game. Now, the alpha was quite promising too. First off, enemies were procedurally generated from several different parts, and several attack types. A very special case was in the very early alphas, where you had enemies that would be able to psychically raise you off the ground and then drop you from a high height to kill you with fall damage. Furthermore, you had 6 playable races that players could choose from and play as. Not only were they internally consistent in style and theme, but they also had interesting dynamics with all the other races politically. For instance, the Hlotl, the enlightened fish people, had a lot of writing and technology and books long before most of the other races. But a great deal of it was destroyed many centuries ago by the Florin, who would adventure to other planets, conquer them, and basically waste all the natural resources of those planets before leaving on to the next one. And when they visited the Hlotl planet, they nearly wiped out the entire race. It was only because the Hlotl could breathe underwater and they moved to underwater settlements that they were able to survive at all. Meanwhile, the Apex have a very negative light of all other races because Apex propaganda ends up alienating their people from all others. This comes out most strongly when you play as any of these races and visit an Apex-inhabited planet. They think, oh, you are a Florin. That must mean that you kill people on sight and that you are completely incapable of speech. And so when they actually meet you, they're just confused. And as you may have picked up, different planets are inhabited by different species, which means that you have to visit other planets in order to see all of them. This encourages space travel, and it is the crux of how Starbound works, because one planet may have a few procedurally generated enemies and have 1 or 2 races settled there, but it's far more interesting to get the full panorama by visiting many planets, and these planets all have completely different biomes. All of this came into a triumphant alpha, and the players were absolutely bored. In a 2016 interview, Ty spoke about his vision for Starbound and his struggle with how little of an impact his monster generation engine made. He said, "In a world where everything is unusual and weird, nothing is unusual and weird. So, we started to move away from the environment in the game world and more into the narrative and the context and the meaning." Ty found that Starbound's world building was far more compelling than the world building. Starbound underwent metamorphosis, from a procedural safari to an intergalactic adventure, from foraging in a lonely universe to finding and meeting its inhabitants. From here, Starbound leaned into 3 new aspects, and they did wonders for the game. First, the game added a whole lot of new, unique dungeons, and they can belong to any one of Starbound's regular races. So for instance, the Glitch are known to have castles and villages and homesteads because they are a mostly medieval age people. But you can also find Glitch sewers, which have a lot of sewer enemies and treasure that you can find there that was dumped in there by the Glitch. The Avians are not only a very market and trade-based nation, but they're also extremely religious. So along with being able to visit giant avian marketplaces with tons of shops and lots of new things, you can also find tombs with tomb protectors. All of these things made adventuring the world unique, because you never knew what sort of new thing you would find. The second thing that you could do in Starbound is build colonies. Not only would you be able to visit other people's villages, but you could make your own. And furthermore, your colonies can have unique settlers. So, if I make a basic house and put a colony deed in it, a tenant will appear and I can start getting taxes from them because I am their landlord. But if I use more unique furniture based on certain categories, I can get unique settlers who give me unique items. Furthermore, Starbound had a really interesting take on combat. So, in Starbound, you have techs. Techs mostly come into three major flavors. You've got your dash tech, your jump tech, and your specialized tech. Your dash tech is very straightforward. It allows you to dash horizontally very quickly. But how that works actually depends on the tech. So for instance, you've got your basic dash, which just goes boosh. Also, another great tech would be the FTL boost, the bubble boost. The targeted blink, which allows you to teleport to your cursor so long as you're within the line of sight, which is so fantastic, but it's extremely costly on your energy. Energy is this limited supply that you have here. You can increase it by getting better armor, but overall it's a very limited resource. When you run out of energy, you can mostly only do regular attacks at that point. So you're encouraged to advance towards an enemy using your techs or different kinds of weaponry, and once you run out of energy, retreat so that you can recharge and then formulate a new battle strategy. And it made battle so expressive. In the end, the game loop for Starbound looks a little bit like this. First, you go underground and mine some ore. Each planet has a different biome and a different ore type, so you're encouraged to see what else is new in a different planet while you're also trying to get ore. It makes for interesting encounters because each biome has its own unique enemies. Second, after you do enough mining and be able to get a lot of stuff, you return to the surface and begin crafting armor and weaponry. Certain quests require you to have a specific armor level in order to do, and once you have proven you're strong enough with that armor type, you can now take on these new quests. These unique quests come along with extremely linear but well-designed dungeons. For instance, after you get your first set of armor, the iron armor, you are eligible to enter the Urkius mining facility. Once you win the boss, you are now able to take your ship to new planets. With these new options, you can find new planets with new ore types and new enemies and new races, and you can find new encounters, and the galaxy just expands in front of you. In the end, Starbound is an adventuring game, where you mine, trade, and do quests to unlock the next kind of planet. Unfortunately, this does mean that Starbound is a game with an end. Eventually, you will find every dungeon, beat every boss, get every type of armor, and you'll maximize your matter manipulator. After you build the castle and the village of your dreams, it ends. But in talking about Starbound, I realized that that's what makes sandbox games fun. Sandbox games don't just give you options, they give you goals. They give you an ending to achieve. It's like any game. The game has an end and it wishes for you to reach it. And every single goal, every boss, every fight is one step towards that eventual ending. It's what gives games meaning. Now, stop the hype train for a bit. There are a few problems with the game that we have to recognize before we go on to the 1.0 release. First off, you can see everything extremely quickly. There are 18 different kinds of dungeons and 10 different kinds of planets, which means in order to see every kind of planet, you are guaranteed to have repeat dungeons. Second, the platforming mechanics feel really bad. Having your player jump up like some mutant frog, hit the ceiling, and then drop down like a bullet before they can reach the other platform is bad. Walking is too slow and jumping is way too fast in order to maneuver any kind of randomized terrain. And lastly, each planet has only one biome, and they always have the same vegetation, the same block types, the same critters, and the same stuff. So, if you ever come to a new forest planet, the only real difference will be the dungeon that generates, and sometimes they'll be the same as ones you've seen before. Though, this is not really much of a problem. If the snow was green on a snow planet, would that really differentiate the worlds? No. As long as you can approach any scenario your way, the game will be fun, it will be approachable, and it will be expressive. That is what makes a good sandbox game. And that's what we have. First off, we should give a huge shout out to platforming, because the platforming is so much better in the 1.0 release. Walking is faster and jumps are lower and more humble, allowing for more gliding at the surface, and that way you're able to make jumps more consistently. Now, I do wish that maybe your horizontal speed could increase as the game goes along, but overall, everyone did a really great job. But wait, have you forgotten the world generation? In Starbound, variation of the surface rises and falls very quickly. Before, when the jumps were higher, you were able to scale these hills very quickly. But now that the jumps are lower, every single one of these hills is an exercise in patience. Now, you have to actually mine the slope so that it takes your jump height into account, which is a terrible oversight by the level designers. Like, you changed the platforming physics, but didn't update the world to accommodate. And secondly, a lot of really great features in the game were straight up cannibalized.
And I said, why? Why do you do this?
Because it's the one thing you can't replace.
In order to really advance towards any situation using these techs, you have to already be in the situation because their range is so low. And it's so basic. Like, it's a mere utility at this point. You can't even use these in battle. But the perhaps most egregious change for me personally is the way that the underground generation has been normalized. Before, you would have underground biomes specific to each planet. A desert planet would have tar biomes underneath it. Mining was an adventure. You never knew what new biomes you would experience, what new unique monsters they would bring. But now, every biome appears on every other planet. And don't even get me started on how power creep of the above surface completely ruined underground. We'll get to that later. So, everything that we thought Starbound did well has been either untouched or worse, downgraded. So, what was Starbound team doing? Well, I'm glad you asked, because Starbound team was very busy adding new things, and all of these things were made in the space of a single year. Amazing, right? You're able to collect fossils and put them together to make fossil statues, but the statues don't do anything. Quests, on the other hand, are extremely valuable. No longer are quests exclusively in the Outpost Hub area. Anyone, anywhere, can give you a special quest of their own. Like, this person here, their friend has gone missing in a nearby abandoned castle. Ooh, or this person here, they have outlaws in a nearby abandoned castle. Except, the time it takes to actually get to that landmark really sucks. Oh, and you know what the best part about quests are? After you finish some quests for some people, there's a random chance they will want to join your crew, and they will ask if they can come with you on your adventure, which is really cool. If the AI was any good, like, you can talk to them using E, but E is also the button to interact with NPCs or open chests, which means that they can just be happening to stand in front of a chest. I am so happy to see you today! But the crew members being stupid isn't really the only problem here. The biggest problem with crew members is that they don't grow. Do you see this healer that I got? This healer will heal me 20 HP, but has a terrible cooldown. However, I expect that as the adventure goes along and I get more HP to my max pool, they will become more useful, right? It doesn't happen. How do you make a crew member system, leave it in such a sorry state, and say, yeah, that's ready for release? And then you've got the main story, which is by far the biggest part of this update. It's the story update, after all. It just fails in execution. So here's how it works. Earth was destroyed. I think we mentioned this, but the main quest actually adds a little bit of story to it. The Earth was destroyed by this monster, and it is your job to defeat this monster before they can destroy any other planets. So, you team up with this girl, Esther Bright, who tells you that we need to collect the 6 ancient artifacts from each of the different alien species in order to save the world. Okay. We can deal with this, we can work with this. A fun quest about saving the world. What's not to love? So, how do we find any of these artifacts? Well, first off, you have to find them in order. Okay. And second off, you have to go to a settlement of each of the species, talk to people, and inspect their furniture.
'Cause it's a really great game. Yeah.
Jokes aside, this is actually really clever, because now you're encouraged to see all the dungeons, all the planets, all the species, and you're told where to go and what to do, so you can actually see all the cool things that Starbound has. Starbound tells you where to go to see the things that it has. Do you see the problem? When you go to a tropical planet, there should be a sense of wonder. I wonder what could be on this planet. I wonder what sort of biomes we'll find, or if there will be any new races here. But instead, Esther will literally tell you, hey, good job getting the Florin artifact. How about you go to a tropical planet to find the avians? Did I mention that the avians live on a tropical planet? Don't forget, you should go to a tropical planet to talk to the avians. And furthermore, let's talk about how those artifacts are actually gotten. After you inspect all the furniture and go back to Esther, she tells you that she has somehow magically found the coordinates of where the artifact is. You'll be able to go to the sale and just teleport to it. You would teleport to the special quest in your space adventure game. Doesn't that sound a little bit messed up? Am I the only one who is confused by why we aren't flying to the planet? Teleporting to instances betrays the feeling of space exploration, because not only does it skip the interesting part where you have to actually collect fuel in order to make it there, but it tells the player anything important that will happen will be put right here. It just drains the life out of any space adventure, because you know that the important stuff will be here and not out there. It reeks of the game not trusting the player to find this stuff or enjoy it for themselves. And so it spoon feeds it to you so that you are forced to see all the cool things this game has to offer. And if there is one thing a sandbox game should never be, it's spoon feeding you content. But wait, it gets worse. Video games as a medium were an evolution of the movie format. Movies are moving pictures that are made by several stationary pictures that are shown one in front of the other. In video games, you don't have the luxury of time because the player is really moving anywhere they want. Instead of moving right, they may move left and jump off the cliff. They could, they're the player. What they say goes. As a result, video games have to make all of their pictures dynamically, and it works something like this. You have a loop, which is called the process function. It starts by clearing the screen of anything that's on it. Then it moves the players, then it prints the game onto the screen, showing the updated position of the player and enemies. Sometimes you'll be running this game on a very slow computer, and you'll only be able to run this entire thing 30 times in a second. And that's still pretty good, but look if you run it 60 times in a second. The game is so much smoother, and it really pops. Plus, whenever the player changes an input or a new enemy appears, you want to be able to see that as soon as possible so that reflexes can kick in. As a result, 60 frames per second is in general better. However, you have to keep in mind that if you run this function 60 times instead of 30 times, this part right here will be run twice as much. Instead of moving 30 times in a second, you will be moving 60 times in a second. And that can do huge damage on how the game plays. In order to combat this, game makers use what's called a strict physics update. The strict physics update says that instead of having the game and the rendering done in the same function, we'll split them up into 2 different functions. By doing this, you're able to move the player the same amount of times every second, no matter who is playing or what they're playing on. Gee, it would be a really bad thing if Starbound didn't have a strict physics update. After all, Starbound is already a game that is poorly optimized and tedious. It's a good thing Starbound does have a strict physics update. Starbound does not have a strict physics update, and this wreaks havoc on the game's multiplayer. Let's say that 2 players are playing in the same world, and one of them is 60 frames per second and the other is 30. This player will move twice as fast, because they are moving twice as fast, and the other friend has to wait for them just to be able to play together. This can also lead to some players dying just because their computer isn't able to keep up.
Oh boy. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff down here.
And the game doesn't like it, so I keep taking fall damage.
Yeah, just stay.
There's water. You okay?
Oh, I almost died!
Oh my gosh, look at this.
I can't,
Oh
I'm
my
not
God.
even doing anything. It's just lagging me.
No!
Yeah, he's pixeling through the wall.
Oh my god!
The player, PBG, Peanut Butter Gamer, was moving so much slower that by the time he was actually able to move, the platform that he was standing on had already moved way more than he could have. Gravity kicks in, and he falls way faster than he should, and gets fall damage on a platform he should have been standing on from the get-go. I'm pretty sure that Starbound is meant to be played at 60 frames per second, but slower computers just can't do that, and the game gets so much worse as a result. So, now that we've had the post-release, we can start patching some of these things, right? Surely these aren't finished, and we'll be able to have the devs upgrade these over the coming months. 1.1, Fishing and New Villages. It's December 2016, everybody. We have added a post-game after finishing the main quest. June 2017, mechs and space stations. We've already decided our next plans. We're going to be adding a bounty hunter system so that you can hunt down space criminals like an awesome space bounty hunter. Which is great, but also not fixing anything we added before or improving the game's quality. The bounty hunter update was ill-fated. Years passed and news on this update faded into the background. And by all accounts, Starbound was abandoned. The release was a betrayal of the game's core values, and it attempted to fatten the game with features nobody needed or asked for. So, why did this happen? If I had to guess, it was because of No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky is a spacefaring, procedurally generated sandbox game. It was announced in 2014, 1 year after Starbound's first trailer was released. No Man's Sky got several awards, with a premise very similar to Starbound, except it was 3D, so it's better. How could Starbound possibly compete? In 2019, Damon Reese, a designer who had worked on Starbound, tweeted this: "I started out my game dev career working on Starbound for almost 2 years. I was 16. I worked hundreds of hours and wasn't paid a single cent for it, while the company made unbelievable amounts of money off my labor, and that of a dozen other unpaid workers." It was a small, brutally straightforward tweet. And then, everyone began joining in. When I did some work for Starbound, I was told, if you do enough work, we'll be able to pay you, by someone who definitely could have just paid me. My work in the game is the character customization options, but I'm not credited for any of it. I was also one of those Starbound contributors. I started when I was 15, and I did a ridiculous amount of work. I sprited the vast majority of the monster parts, over 350 sprites. All of the halal armor, most of the avian armor, a ton of the halal furniture, just to name some. I almost did the audio and music for Starbound. Almost. Until the director told me that this was going to be unpaid. He revealed that none of the artists or coders were getting paid either, and I said that didn't seem right to me. He just exploded at me after that. I've talked about this in private previously, but I was in the same situation, late 2011, early 2012. I wanted to be a game dev, and I thought a free internship under them would be a way to put my foot in the door. It wasn't. There were 3 coders, Kyron, Omni, and Bart. So officially, there were 3 artists, 3 coders. Then there was Armagon, who was the level designer, Ty, and the revolving door of what we called contributors, which in practice was basically slave labor. People would offer to work for free on the game, assuming it'd get their foot in the door for a paid job. This is even how I got my start there.
and would produce content until they either realized they weren't going to get offered a paid position or moved on to something else. I was really naive and too afraid to ask to be paid, because anyone who did would be screamed at. I remember the Nova kids were a fan race, and I don't think the person who came up with them got compensated either. I wish I could remember who it was. Polygon began investigating the thread and followed up on many of the people speaking out. From there, we get to see a real picture of why Starbound ended up so disjointed and incomplete. Finn was great at letting people assume things so he could pull the rug out from under them. He'd play favorites, he'd be enamored with whoever was the newest contributor, and they'd assume that meant they'd get an offer for a contract. But it just never come. And then after they got sick of it and they stopped producing assets, he'd move on to the next person. This is what Rowe called the revolving door of unpaid labor. Ty would catch on to some new dev helping with the game, lavish them with creative freedom, and use their work until they stopped producing. One artist, Spook Kitty, got replaced after just falling ill and taking some time off. I was away for only 2 or 3 weeks. When I jumped back in, Finn wouldn't respond to me with anything more than a word or two, if at all. I had already been replaced. Any fan that was willing to provide free work was enough to replace me. I had no choice but to fade away. I was unwanted and unneeded.
So, Ty used his free contracting help these contractors to differentiate Starbound using other people's ideas.
This is where the pieces start falling into place. If a designer increases a player's horizontal speed and rolls back the jumps, and then gets replaced immediately after, there wouldn't be anyone to finish the job and correct the hill layers. Once you start seeing this, you can find it everywhere in Starbound. Crew members, fossils, moons, Nova kids. In a game, every mechanic is the brainchild of at least one team member. But when your team is a revolving door of labor, the champions of each mechanic get thrown out before the polishing stage, leaving a theater of unfinished ideas. I think if Ty had truly respected the time of his workers and paid them appropriately, every mechanic in Starbound could have been a wonderfully fleshed out experience. But he wasn't. And it isn't. Since Ty was trying to get as much raw content as possible, he probably didn't shoot down anything, allowing whatever sounded cool in the moment to be added, so it could get finished off of passion alone, without ever needing to pay someone.
Sandbox games are often imagined as an anything-goes environment in terms of development, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Sandbox games, as in all games, have to reach a certain audience, and as such are built to give a certain experience. When making yourself dinner, you can't just throw anything in and expect to get a meaty stew out. Instead, you might get something even better. While the abuse of power Finn used on his contractors is awful, the game itself isn't completely gone. Sure, the game has scores of abandoned features and projects that pass off as content, and it assumes a 60 frames per second rig to even be playable, but it's still fun, and people still enjoy it. But why? It's because of mods. Starbound isn't a bad game, it's just an unfinished one. It has many holes, but no flaws, and everyone feels that the game is unfinished. But that only pushes them to enter the mod workshop and add the one thing that they really want. And these unfinished pieces aren't just places in need of fixing either. These are places of player customization, making a game that is even more expressive, arguably, than the original Starbound. For instance, the Halotl may want to be breathing underwater because they're fish people. Or, even more interestingly, they could be able to swim extremely quickly, like the Zora in Legend of Zelda. Imagine just going zoom through the water and leaving all your enemies behind. You could make entire lakes in your area to fast travel from house to house. Or, if you wanted a challenge adventure, you could make it so that the Halotl actually can't breathe air and have to be underwater in order to survive. That would be a really unique challenge mode in order to play. When Ty first began making Starbound, he wanted to use procedural generation to make an infinite game. But what he ended up with is arguably better, because it's made by people. Mods can make anything. Or can I? I have a confession to make about sandbox games. I love digging. It is the thing, when I play a sandbox game, the thing I play it for is the ability to dig. I love the topography of the underground. I love seeing the way that the world generates to make it feel realistic and whole. I love min-maxing my digging size by going through the different holes in the world. The Rod of Discord is quite honestly my favorite Terraria item. And most of all, I love the risk-reward system of underground areas. You start at the very top of the world, where the most common and basic ores can be found. If you use these ores, you can make very basic armor. You start off with the weaker armors, and as you go deeper and deeper with your better equipment, you're able to get newer ores to get better and better equipment. That is the slow and steady way to grow in a game. But because this is a sandbox game, you could be completely naked in terms of armor and go directly to the bottom of the world and mine the hardest materials. Starbound not only ruins digging, but spits on its face while it's at it, because there is no reason to do it. You know why? Towns. Here is a completely new village that I happened to stumble upon at the very beginning of the game. It has weapons, matter manipulator modules, upgrade modules, tech cards. Do you remember when tech cards used to be made of multiple parts, so you'd have to find them one by one, and it felt like you were adding to something? Well, no more. You can go to a random villager with their random chests and get it for free. Why even have an underground if it's going to be replaced to this extent? There basically is nothing else for the game to give you that you wouldn't already have. Quests don't have anything to give you. They could just give you weapons that you already found from the chests. The underground suffers because you can find the bars you would be looking for in the chests. And furthermore, you could buy even more from the outpost after you get all the pixels. Did I mention that the pixel economy straight up collapses under this system? After you get a lot of new weapons, any of the ones that are too weak or that you wouldn't use, you can sell back to the market, which means that you get a near infinite amount of pixels for no cost. Going to the outpost and going to the bare miners would allow you to get ore in a more sustainable fashion than digging ever could. So I have to ask, if the underground is broken and boring and tedious, who is going to fix it? The point I'm trying to make here is that if something is ignorable, there is no reason to make content for it. I said Starbound has no problems, only holes. Well, the holes caused problems. Starbound obscures the most egregious parts of the game to remain playable, and yet you expect me, the modder, to somehow make mods for the mechanics that you made irrelevant? No! What this results in is a dichotomy between pertinence and fun. In order for mods to be made for something, it has to be pertinent. But in order for mods to be made in bulk, it also has to be not fun. Races are a fantastic example of this. You always have to play as a certain race. So, that's pertinent. But races are not fun because they give you nothing to work with. So, races, no surprise, is the #1 modded item in Starbound. New races, a race generator, race dialogue. Certain races have special abilities. Certain races have special armor. Certain races are based off races based on fracking universe races. However, other mechanics don't have that same kind of appeal. The underground is neither pertinent nor fun, and therefore gets no mods. You always have to go to dungeons, especially if you want to do the main quest. So they are very pertinent, and they are also fun. So in general, modders don't feel like they need to make new dungeons, but those who love the dungeons will, out of passion, make new ones, because they're sure that some people will love them. And they're right. However, crew members are not fun because they're stupid. What about fossils? Fossils are neither pertinent, nor useful, nor fun. No mods. But what about moons? This is an easy one, right? In Starbound, your planet needs to get fuel. And to get fuel, you have to visit moons. Moons have ghosts, and the ghosts can kill you in one hit if they touch you, so you have to avoid them. But the ghosts also increase in speed the more fuel you get. What this results in is a risk-reward system. The deeper you go into the moon, the more fuel you can find. So you have to balance between getting more fuel and escaping the ghosts. Sometimes if you get really, really risky, you can go deep into the planet, and then you have like 4 Urkius ghosts chasing you, and you have to use advanced platforming and your hook shot in order to get back to the surface to escape to your ship with the fuel in hand. It's exciting, intense, but I think I might be the only person who feels this way. Moons are, in general, extremely barren, and even though they have fuel and Urkius ghosts, they don't really have anything else. So, fuel is important. So obviously this is a pertinent mechanic, right? People may not think it's fun, but it's definitely pertinent, which means that this would definitely get a lot of mods, making it probably a super fleshed out part of the game, right? Right? No, stupid! If you go to the outpost, there's this little shop here, a little vending machine, where it sells you, little cookies, little sweets, and Urkius fuel for 5 pixels each. And in case you had forgotten, the pixel economy in this game is a joke because of villages. So as a result, there is no reason at all to visit moons, because you can just buy them in bulk. Yet another casualty of Starbound's hazardous village system. These are the boundaries that modders work in, but filling the holes in Starbound, while amazing, means new types of mods have to be introduced by the devs, which they're clearly not open to do. Apparently it's more fun to add new mechanics than to add an outlet exclusively for modders. People often treat mods like magic, but that's not really the case. Mods in Starbound work by editing the assets file. The assets file has all the weapons, quests, dialogue, and races that you can play as, but it doesn't have the game's core features. You can't optimize Starbound using mods. You can't add new mechanics to Starbound using mods. You can only work with what the game already gives you. So, what are some things that Starbound could have had? Should have? Well, the first one should be obvious. Starbound needs unique planet instances. The teleporter in the ship tells you that the most important things in this game are right here, and nothing else matters. This could be fixed if we just add the ability for planets to be spawned in that are unique, one-of-a-kind planets with their own quests and abilities and linear progression and structure. We've already seen how adding unique enemies has had huge dividends on how much fun it is to adventure planets. So for instance, at one point in the game, you can find this special item under the sea called the globe, the Halotl globe. It is a model of Halotl Homeworld, the original one, the one that the Florins attacked and destroyed. And according to the Halotl inspection of the globe, it's still intact. The planet is still bustling and active, even after the Florin rampage. Which means that you could theoretically find this place. Can you imagine how awesome it would be to just stumble on Halotl Homeworld? You would just beam down and there would be houses upon houses and rows upon rows of Halotl artifacts and art. Imagine beaming down as a Florin and you get instantly taken into custody because Florin are just forbidden on the planet. And maybe you could have unique quests as a Florin, or a unique quest as a human, or as a Halotl, that would allow you to adventure and see more of this Halotl culture because you found something yourself. What I think would end up happening is that modders would make their own special planets and define them to be close to other points of interest. So you'd have Halotl Homeworld right here, and the modders would say, well, I have the Halotl fishing hole, so I'll put it right here. And so you'd end up with entire sections of the galaxy that belong to specific races. So this would be the Halotl quadrant. But you would end up with the Apex quadrant over here. Since the Apex are a totalitarian government and Big Ape is always watching, there would end up being a blockade around the entire quadrant, keeping you from entering. And you'd have to actually take your ship and attack the blockade in order to make it through and see what it's like within Big Ape's domain. In fact, we could also have unique crewmates as well. Instead of having like another hat quest to give you another crew member, you could have a backstory to them, an adventure, something you could tell others about to say, I got Perry the Platypus from fighting a giant scientist apex on top of a mountain with their laser beam pointed at the moon. And it would be fun. Here's an example, something that I wish was in Starbound. The mutant apex. A little bit of lore about the apex. The apex were originally a much more human-like race until a completely natural, mysterious waterborne pathogen of unknown origin threatened their survival. Fortunately, the ruling government, known as the Minicog, had developed a cure that countered the harmful effects of the pathogen, with the unexpected side effect of starting the VEP, which developed their bodies to a more ape-like state. On the other hand, it also greatly increased their mental capabilities, leading to even bigger advances in super science. All records of Apex society prior to VEP were destroyed, and the Minicog's leader, Big Ape, took complete and total control over Apex society. For their safety and security, of course. Apex leadership dictates jobs, the economy, fashion trends, food rations, and, of course, the random lottery for volunteers for tests in the advancement of Apex biological science. The VEP was a success in the sense that it made the Apex smarter, a superior race to all other species. But the side effect was that the Apex are now weaker physically. It's clear that the Minicog are continuing their research, and if you visit any one of their labs, the scene is horrific. So, let's say that you visit one of these labs with your good healer companion. I love them so much. And as you visit deeper in the lab, you notice one strange set piece that isn't usually there. There's a special containment unit. If you manage to break into the containment unit, you find a single Apex that is still breathing. The healer says that maybe they might be able to save them, and so begins a quest. The Apex is near dying, and you need to know exactly what the situation is with them, what research was done on them, what drugs were given so that you can properly counteract them. You begin going through the entire laboratory, using your inspect tool to find clues as to what goes on, and then, after you get enough, the alarm starts going off. Scientists begin pouring into the hole, and they begin attacking you, trying to take back their precious cargo. And so you begin fighting alone this wave after wave of scientists in a timed event that, if you make it, you can save this Apex's life. But the experiment was a success. This Apex, despite being nearly destroyed, was kept on life support by the scientists because he showed the abilities of psychic powers. Do you remember in the original alpha where enemies would be able to lift you into the sky and then drop you, letting fall damage do the killing? That's what I imagine the mutant Apex being able to do. The pinnacle of Apex science has given an Apex the ability to kill people with their mind. But as a result, they can hardly take care of themselves, and they have to be defended at all costs. Even a little bit of damage could kill them. But that's an interesting ally. That's an ally that could be useful in certain fights and not in others. And most importantly, they have a story. And lastly, and perhaps the most promising aspect of Starbound, is the possibility of getting contextual generation. Contextual generation is mentioned in Ty's interview with Inverse that we talked about before. All of our environments meant nothing more than the next one, and you just wanted to jump through them to see how things would change. And that was the experience. But you never became attached to any of them. None of them stood out. So we started to move away from the environment and game world, and tried to move more into the narrative and the meaning, and tried where we could procedurally generate that. This is of course talking about the quest system, which is, by the way, the only thing in the game that does this, but it proves that this can be done. Contextual generation says that an area is not only interesting in and of itself, but it references and hooks into other areas of the same planet. In quests, NPCs tell you about activities in nearby landmarks, sending you to quests about them. But if we can take that a step further, we can make not only towns know about nearby activities, but everything. The place where the enemy is that you were sent to fight could also know about nearby landmarks and could hook into them. Maybe the outlaw that you're trying to see is actually just trying to get vengeance for their dead grandfather who lives in the nearby graveyard. And if you take them to the graveyard, you could actually commune with his soul and find peace. And then the outlaw would want to be a part of your crew because you made friends with them, not just because you nearly beat them into submission and they don't want to die. So long as the plant has generated content, the quest could continue. Maybe dungeons could start having keys, and the contextual mixing of dungeons and NPC areas could allow keys to be spread across several quests and battles. If I had to compare this ideal Starbound with anything, it would have to be Doctor Who. A wanderer from nowhere, experiencing the richness of the galaxy one adventure at a time. This is a Starbound that I would play. This is a Starbound that I would mod for. It's a ping on Discord. Hi everyone. This week we surprise dropped an unstable build of Starbound 1.4, the Bounty Hunter update. Okay, sure. What's the worst that could happen? Everything that we thought that we could use in this game was completely flipped upside down by a single update. And so we return to Murphy's Law of Programming. The most secure code is the one that is never changed. A gargantuan mod workshop has been created. So no matter what you do, you are going to deprecate at least one mod when you try to add something. What should Chucklefish do in this case? Working on the project is not only hard, but expensive. And to top it all off, you will get little to no return on the investment. In a best case scenario, thousands of mods will be deprecated, but the new features will breathe new life into the game. And maybe the old modders will be forgiving enough to update their mods to fit the new version. In a worst case scenario, the community will find your sweeping changes a betrayal to the mod workshop. So now, you've insulted their enthusiasm, and your changes may not have even been that good! But if we do nothing, the player base will eventually die out. Maybe Starbound wasn't meant to live. At least past a certain point. After all, to them, Starbound represents a dark side of the company's history that we'd all rather forget. Should we just let it die, though? Should we let someone else, years down the road, pick up the pieces of Starbound's broken vision and make a new game to realize that failed promise? What would you do?